Okay, thank you and welcome to the Finance Committee for January 22nd. We'll be moving to final deliberations on the budget, I believe, or that's our goal today. So I will look to the agenda and see if there are any concerns with the agenda or changes. Seeing none, okay, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And then I will look to the minutes of the January 19th Finance Committee meeting. Mayor Borman?
It just occurred to me when reading these minutes, and I didn't look back at the previous minutes, and maybe it has changed. I was just thinking it would be helpful, I think, to add in the council members present that Lisa, as the Chief Administrative Officer, is a non-voting member, just to make it clear in the minutes that you weren't voting.
So where would you like to see that added, Mayor Borman?
Right after your title, Chief Administrative Officer, bracket, non-voting member.
Non-voting?
Yeah, just
okay.
to keep it clear.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. That can, so I'll move that those minutes be approved. Well, first of all, were there any other noted errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, I'll move that those minutes then be adopted as amended. Those in favor? Okay, that's carried unanimously as well. So then the intent today, as we mentioned, is to go through to get to the final deliberations on the budget. We have a couple of questions to respond to, and then to get into the details around the use of the Tax Stabilization Reserve. So Ms. Rogers, do you want to walk us through some of that?
I will. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
And I will just move to slideshow and see if you see that. Seems to be slow this morning.
No, we see your, you'll have to swell. Yep, now we see it.
Great. So as we have done in the last few Finance Committee meetings, we'll start with providing you with information on questions that we had from the previous meeting. So we'll turn it over first to Ms. Smithers, and then we'll bounce back and forth a little bit as we work through. There we go.
Okay, so a question that we had from Councillor Hillstad near the end of the last meeting was related to the capital project around the surface replacement at Grotto Playground. It's currently a rubber surface. The capital project is $35,000 to replace that surface because parts of it did fail a fall test. So the question was, would it be cheaper to replace it with pea gravel? The question is no, because we actually cannot replace the rubber surface with pea gravel without doing some substantial renovation to the playground itself. The reason for that is, and I'll be clear, the picture on this is not the Grotto Playground. It's an example of an alternative that I'm going to get into next. With the Grotto Playground specifically, replacing the rubber surface with pea gravel would require that we redo the actual border around the playground structure, as well as redo the playground structure itself, because the structure sits on piles to a specific height designed for that rubber surface. So it would require substantial renovation to the playground, which would well exceed the $35,000. However, in researching that, our Parks and Public Works staff landed on another possible alternative that council may want to consider. And that is they've discovered that some municipalities in Alberta, Airdrie is one example, is doing a bit more of a focused when they have rubber surfaces that are failing the fall tests. So they replace only that portion of the surface that fails with new rubber, and then they cover the entire surface with an artificial turf to address the kind of broken up nature of that new surface, right? Because they're only going in and doing selective repairs across the surface. So we have not done this in Canmore before, but like I've noted there, it has been done in other municipalities, including Airdrie is more of a relatively local example. And we estimate it would cost about $25,000 to take that approach. So it would be about $10,000 less. And then I've included this picture just as an example of what that alternative would look like.
Thank you, Ms. Smithers. Are there questions or discussion on this? Yes, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Ms. Smithers. Do we have any idea how long this artificial turf surface would last in relation to the rubber surface?
Like I've said, so we have no direct experience with it, but what we know is in other locations, it has been in place. So for example, Airdrie has been doing this for a few years now, and it does appear to be holding up well. I would remind council that as Mr. Camo pointed out when we were doing the capital presentations, there is a broader look that Parks and Public Works are doing across all of their playgrounds to look at whether we should just over the long term be moving to pea gravel as we do the bigger life cycle of the structures as well. So this is kind of a shorter term until we have that bigger picture look at a better way to manage our playgrounds across all of our assets.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Comfort.
Is this a life cycle replacement, or is this a, are we doing this because it's failing?
A bit of both. It's life cycling out, and as a result of that, there are sections of the playground that have failed.
Thank you.
Playground surface, to be clear.
Mayor Borman.
Just that point, didn't we hear from Mr. Como that that playground was failing the, whatever they call it, the ball test, the
fall test, yeah.
Ball test?
Yeah, so this would be going into those specific sections of the rubber surface that had failed and cutting them out and replacing them. So I guess the two options are replace the whole rubber surface for $35,000 or go into, excuse me, those specific sections that did fail the fall test and replace just those and then cover the entire surface with the turf, the artificial turf, and that would be about $10,000 less.
Any other questions? Yes, Mayor Borman.
So do we have any idea over future years? I mean, if you replace or repair one spot or several spots, is that likely then to be necessary every few years that other spots will then start failing the fall test? And are we going to end up having to just sort of patch repair that surface regularly?
I cannot answer that with any certainty. It could be the case, it may not be. And that's why I kind of flagged for council that there is the kind of broader investigation that Parks wants to do across our playgrounds. So the question that was put to administration coming out of the finance committee meeting was, can we replace the surface with pea gravel with the intent of having a lower cost capital project? And so the information I'm providing back is not recommending this alternative, but just saying no, replacing it with pea gravel would not be less cost. However, there is another alternative if council's intent is to save some money on the capital project.
Is there any other discussion on this item, or is there a member of the finance committee wishing to move that we go in this direction? Without any further direction from the finance committee, we would stay with the proposed capital project. Councillor Sanford?
I would be willing to move that motion to amend it to this particular surface treatment. I think we should try it. And I would imagine that the turf would actually protect the rubber surface underneath as well. I mean, we don't know that unless we have some wear and tear data on it. I think it's a small playground, so it might be a good place to try such an option, but I would move this as an amendment.
Okay, so the motion would be that, do we have a project number reference, Ms. Smithers, for this? Or maybe we could just say the Grotto Playground Capital Project scope be amended to this alternative described here. for $25,000, a $10,000 savings.
So
Mayor
repair fail points only, cover entire surface with artificial turf.
For an estimated cost of $25,000.
Right.
Mayor Borelman, are you speaking to that motion?
Yes, I am. I'm not sure I can support it. I'll listen to the rest of the debate, but for $35,000, we're getting infrastructure that we're familiar with, and we know what to expect over future years. If we go to an untried method, we don't know. I mean, it could be that every 2 or 3 years, we're going to have to peel up some of the turf and replace bits and pieces of the turf or whatever. Yeah, I'd rather just move forward with the alternative that we're familiar with, and we know what to expect over the future years of the use of the playground.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mara.
Thank you. I'm just curious, do we know the life expectancy of the rubber surface? What our average life expectancy has been?
Ms. Smithers, can you answer that at all?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse to unmute. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I will connect with, I'll see if I can connect with Parks right now and get an answer.
Thank you.
Did you want to speak at all, Councillor Mara, to the motion or not at this point?
I will. I'm not sure if I can support the motion. Because I would like to know the life expectancy comparison. I'm same thought process of Mayor Borman that we may be replacing other areas of it, so it may cost more money in the end. So I'd rather go with something that we know and then move forward from there. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I have a question. I understood that we're going to go to, over time, go to pea gravel for all the playgrounds. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. That analysis is being done by Parks to determine if that is the most appropriate action moving forward, but we haven't done that full analysis.
And when will that be complete? When will we have that information to make a decision?
Ms. Smithers, can you answer that?
I'm not sure. I think it is something that they are intending to complete this year. I would have to check back with Mr. Camo. I do know, just looking at some of the reference material that I have now been able to take a look at, the rubberized life surfaces have an approximate 10-year lifespan. So it is a shorter lifespan than the pea gravel. As Mr. Camo mentioned at the capital meeting, the pea gravel is easier to deal with the longer lifespan because they can just add more gravel to the areas that fail or are a concern, and then kind of churn it all up and redistribute it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Seeley?
I'll support this amendment. I thank administration for doing the work on this, and other municipalities are using it. So try something new. Hopefully we get longer life out of it, and it's $10,000 cheaper.
Mayor Borman?
Spirit of the debate, maybe we won't get another 10 years out of it, and in 3 years, we're going to have to spend another $20,000 to repair another portion of it. So simply going by the fact that there's at least one other municipality that's trying this as a rationale for doing the same, I don't see the value, frankly. If we knew that this approach would save $10,000 and last for 5 or 10 years, that would be different, but there's no certainty on that. So yeah, I'll disagree with you.
Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I'll support it. They're taking the experience from other municipalities, and I have a little bit of knowledge about this, about flooring surfaces. And I still think that it would be better to go this route and with an eventual with knowing that the eventuality is we're looking for is to go to pea gravel, which in long term is cheaper and still works to protect kids. So I'll support it.
Councillor Hillstead?
So I have a question of clarification for Mrs. Smithers with, is it possible once the AstroTurf is down to, if a section does fail, to peel back the AstroTurf and just repair the rubber and put the AstroTurf back down, or does the whole thing have to come up? Because that will help me determine which way I'm going to go with this.
I am not sure that we have sufficient detail on the specifics of that. Like I say, we don't have the direct experience with it. We just know that other municipalities have used it as an option in terms of versus replacing the entire surface. Whether that means that they can go in annually, pull it up, replace, fails, well, and I don't even think they do the tests annually. So if they would go in every 2 or 3 years, rip it up, replace new holes, pull it back down, I don't know.
Okay.
I can't speak to that.
Okay, Councillor Mara and then Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. I'm just curious, when we're looking at eventually changing possibly other playgrounds and all playgrounds to pea gravel, this project would not change to pea gravel until such time as the rubber surface wore out. Is that correct?
Correct, until it would be life cycled out. And Mr. Kamosh just gotten back to me that they are planning to have that investigation done in terms of how to handle replacement of surfaces going forward in time for the 2022 budget cycle. So if this playground were replaced with a new rubber surface, it would then be life cycled out in probably another 10 or 15 years.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum?
So the one thing we actually even talked about is maintenance. We can talk about how inexpensive or expensive it is to actually install something on this playground, but we haven't really had any discussion as to what the operating effect would be of this. So I can imagine that animal droppings will get lost quite easily within this AstroTurf. And that could be an additional burden on the Parks Department when they clean playgrounds. I've also heard that other municipalities have been using it, but we actually haven't heard if there's been any analysis if it's been being used successfully. And I just wanted to point out that the CAO keeps trying to remind us that the pea gravel is actually going to be investigated. It's not a for sure thing yet. We don't know if that is where Parks is going. So with all of those questions in mind, and understanding how easily AstroTurf absorbs dirt and garbage and things like that, I think I'll just stick with what we had in the capital plan. Thanks. I won't be able to support this motion.
Councillor Hillstead?
I think I will not be able to support the motion either. Sticking with what we know, I think will be best for now. And as these rubber playgrounds continue to possibly life cycle a little shorter than we'd like, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity again to get a little more information on this type of replacement and see how it is working in other municipalities for when the next time something like this may come up. This may become an option that we like, but right now I just don't think we have enough information. I would like the savings, but I would hate to get the savings this year and then have additional costs in future years that make this not a savings in the end. So I would stick with the rubber surface.
Okay, is there any other discussion or debate on this item? Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I feel like we're micromanaging them. I don't feel I have the expertise to judge which is the better surface or which is an equivalent. If this is a recommendation as a viable alternative that saves $10,000, and that comes from our experts, our in-house experts, I would support it. So can Ms. Smithers say that's what's happening here? Or is this just an alternative that was researched and is just put out there?
intent in putting this forward is to offer up an alternative that would meet council's intent of, or would meet the intent of the question that was posed to us of, is there a lower cost alternative than the rubberized surface? What my team has done is said, there is, it wouldn't be the pea gravel that we were questioned about, but if council's intent is save some money on this project, here's one option. It's not a recommendation to say we would go this way instead. It's just being transparent with council that there's another cheaper option that we've investigated.
Okay, so
No means a recommendation to proceed with this instead of.
it's not a recommendation to proceed with this, or it's a, like,
No, they've said we could do this if council wants to save $10,000 on the project.
but it doesn't really say, when I look at the alternative, it doesn't really say what the negative points would be. It doesn't say we might be doing this every year, we might be patching every year. Like, there's nothing there to sort of make that judgment. So I would consider this an administration deal, and I honestly don't know which way to vote. So I'll have to think about it a little bit. You'll have to give me a moment. Sorry.
I think my interpretation, sorry to interject here, is that, you know, we had been going to the rubberized surfaces because they were cheaper operationally, and pea gravel is actually quite a bit of operational cost to maintain. Councillor McCallum was referring to animal droppings. That was something that was constantly getting lost within the pea gravel playgrounds, etc. So the rubberized surface was a bit of a trial to begin with. What we're discovering is that it might not have the life expectancy we were hoping. So some of these surfaces are trials. They're dependent on use and wear and tear from use. So I don't know that we have the answers right now to specifically respond to some of what council's concerns are regarding the ability to peel back, or whether other areas of the playground may fail. You know, there's certain locations where there's a height differential that's really important. On the periphery, where there isn't that height differential, it's probably that's not where we do the fall tests, right? We do the fall tests where there's a height differential and where children could fall from a height. And that's, so I don't know that we have all the answers, and these new surfaces are just really being tested in community. So that would be what I would add to the discussion. I'm not sure that answers your question though, Councillor.
That helps. That helps.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Mayor Borman, did you have another point?
No, I don't want to belabor this.
Okay. Is there any other discussion or debate before we, Councillor Sanford, did you want to say anything to close? No? Okay, so is everybody clear on the motion? We don't have it up, but it's essentially this, to move to this alternative here that's described in these last three bullets. Okay, I will call the question on Vice Sanford's, Councillor Sanford's motion. Those in favor? And opposed? The motion is defeated with Councillor Sanford and Councillor Comfort in support. Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to Dr. Cottle, who will give an update on our CMP and museum.
Yeah, so just wanted to let council know we were unable to get Staff Sergeant Singleton to come today. He had previous commitments, but he will be coming to your council meeting on February 2nd. He'll be the first item on the agenda. And at that time, he'll just speak to the impact, the potential impact of eliminating a position, and really just have a dialogue and a Q&A with council. He is clear he'll support whatever decision the town makes, just wants to be able to have a conversation and answer any questions you may have. So he won't be here today, but he will be at your council meeting on February 2nd. That means you'll need to make the decision around the photo radar funding and that position at the February 23rd meeting when you're approving the budget. So you'll have plenty of time to think about it. So that was that on the RCMP update. Also just wanted to
interject on the RCMP update. Sorry, Ms. Cottle, just to remind the Finance Committee that this whole issue was in reference to the 2022 budget, so will not prevent you from recommending moving forward with the 2021 budget today. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, great point. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and then also just wanted to flag that in their affiliates budget, the museum does have a capital request in that budget. And so administration is recommending all of the affiliate operating budgets be moved forward as presented, but we did not include the museum's request in the capital project. I have been in conversation with the museum about this capital project since last summer, and they are in the process of finalizing some of the details of it. They need to have a board meeting on January 28th before they can really speak to the details of it. And we've been talking about, before this request comes to council, we first need to have a council workshop to make sure we all understand the project. So the museum is not ready yet to have that workshop. It'll be sometime March 9th or later. And so at that time, once we have the workshop, then if council's interested in proceeding with that project, we'll be able to discuss how to bring it forward. So just wanted to, if you read the details of your affiliate budget request, you'll see that capital request in there. Just wanted to make sure it was clear that that is not right now in the capital plan that you'll be approving.
And I would just add that there is nowhere close to sufficient information in that submission to allow the Finance Committee or Council to make a decision on a capital request. So we would need a lot more information.
Yeah, which will be the point of the workshop. Some of that information is they don't want to put in the public realm just yet because it's not ready for public consumption. So we'll be working on preparing that, or they'll be working on preparing that for the workshop. So more to come.
Are there any questions on either the RCMP presentation or the museum request? Okay.
Okay, so we'll.
Councillor Sanford has a question, it looks like. Councillor Sanford?
Yes, I'm just unclear as to how we're going to handle that in the 2021 budget. Is this a 2021 budget request for capital or 2020?
It is a 2021 budget request, but they're not prepared to provide any details. So it's not in the 2021 budget. After the workshop, if council wants to move that forward in 2021, we'll have to come to a council meeting to add a capital project to the already approved budget.
And we would have to amend the budget then.
Not part of anything that you're approving.
Okay, all right, just to be clear.
Yep.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Cole.
So we'll move on to Ms. Richardson, who will walk us through the Tax Stabilization Reserve and Councillor McCallum's motion from the 19th.
Perfect. So one of the things we wanted to go through, as Ms. Rogers had just said, was an illustrative example of the Tax Stabilization Reserve, both how the proposed draw would reduce taxes, how that would impact the balance in the Tax Stabilization Reserve, and also how we'd, a reminder of how we'd proposed to use it in future years to smooth some of the anticipated increases we have going forward from RCMP and fire. So I'm going to pull it up as a workbook live so we can make modifications and show some of those impacts on the fly. But first I wanted to go through some of the key assumptions that are inherent to the model as we've prepared it. So the first key assumption is that there are no contributions included for the timeframe 2021 to 2027. As the Finance Committee may recall, funding only comes from one-time transfers or unbudgeted sources of revenue. So we don't plan for those, but they do sometimes happen when we have small surpluses. Some of those things, those have funded the Tax Stabilization Reserve that we currently have. Again, it's a way that the model is currently conservative in some ways in its preparation, that we're not showing any additional contributions over this horizon, but they could arise again. This is just an illustrative example at this point. The next assumption is that we are assuming the census will be conducted this year, at which point our population will push our RCMP cost share to 90% from the 70%. And then that would happen the following year. So we're assuming the census happens in 2021, and then those cost increases would come the following year in 2022. Additionally, future years include a proposed plan for staffing increases. That comes from the financial plan from the RCMP, and I'll come back to that a little bit more in just a minute. We're also assuming future amounts for the plan for this 6-year phase-in of peak staffing. And again, I'll come back to that in a little bit. So in addition to those big pieces that we're planning for, generally all our other costs go up over time due to inflation, taking on new assets as the town grows, et cetera. So we've put this at 5% before those additional RCMP and fire increases. Again, this is just an illustrative example. 5% might not be the right number. It might be lower and everything would accordingly shift down a bit, but that isn't material for the purposes of the relationships we're trying to show with this. We've also assumed growth of 400,000 every year. That's consistent with our assumptions for 2021. So where that becomes important is when we talk about our tax increases, we're always generally speaking of them net of that growth. So overall, again, I just really want to reiterate, this is meant to be an illustrative example demonstrating the relationship between taxes and the Tax Stabilization Reserve and how we can use the reserve to smooth the impact of some of those future anticipated increases. The numbers are based on what we believe are reasonable assumptions and some simple math, but will change as we get closer to the time horizons we're speaking of. I've modeled out to 2027 for the purposes of this, and that feels a long way off, especially with the year we've just had. On that note, I do want to highlight that we do want to maintain some flexibility with the Tax Stabilization Reserve. Already for the first part of 2021, our recreation facilities have remained closed. And we don't know when they'll be able to reopen. And that wasn't planned at the time that the budget was prepared. So we know things are going to continue to change from what we had originally anticipated. And so that helps make the case for, ensuring we have some flexibility with the Tax Stabilization Reserve and that we're not entirely draining it, that we know more unanticipated outcomes could be coming our way. So with regards to these large assumptions, so I'm not going to go into detail on this. This is just a reminder. This is what Dr. Cottle had spoken to when she did the detailed department review. I believe that was back on maybe the 7th as part of what was planned going forward for fire. So this is loosely what we've based our future plan on, is the full 6 years of this phase in. Again, we've planned for 2021, 2022, and 2023 in our 3-year operating plan. We've done some preliminary calculations for outside of that. But again, this is really preliminary at this point for this illustrative example. Similarly, if we go on to the RCMP, there are future positions, again, as I've spoken to, planned in the multi-year RCMP plan that we've received. So those are coming in 2023 and 2024. But generally what we've experienced is that it can take 1 to 2 years to get an officer. So what you'll see when we get to the model is that we've shifted those officer positions out by a year to account for that delay that we often experience. So the years are slightly different than what they've included in their plan, but match with our realized experience of knowing the timeframes that it takes for those to actually come into place for us. So we've also planned not just for the 90%, but also for those future positions. So that was all I was going to say on these big key assumptions. If there are any questions on that, I'm happy to take them now, or we can actually dive into the numbers and start looking at the model.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Just out of curiosity, when our population is considered, do they consider our shadow population as well, or just our permanent? For the census, sorry, for
it's all based on the federal census, which only counts permanent population.
All right, I just wanted to be sure. Are we seeing any interesting trends in with regards to, I know our assessments are not complete, but I'm curious if our assessor has commented at all on any interesting trends that he happens to be seeing in commercial versus residential, or within those sectors themselves individually.
That's a great question.
If you remember last year, our interesting trend was that we had a larger piece of the pie within commercial, but that there were certain pieces or certain ratepayers that were more affected than others. And I was just curious if if we'd seen anything like that.
Correct. And then the big impact in 2020 was that for non-residential, where there is an income component to their assessment, for a lot of our non-residential sector, they were significantly impacted from COVID and had significant impacts to their revenue. Now that all doesn't happen to hit in 1 year, there is kind of a three-year
roll, yeah,
to smooth out some of those impacts. But I am expecting that this 1 year drop will have an increase, but I haven't gotten a formal analysis on that yet. I do have our assessors slated to come to, I believe it's the February COW, to come do a presentation ahead of the assessment notices going out to inform council as to the trends that they're seeing as they've been preparing the assessments for this year.
Okay. And then with our rec facilities, I noted that in the slides that you sent us that, and what you just stated, recreation facilities are still closed. We don't know when they're open. Within the 2021 budget, can you remind me what point in time we have budgeted for rec facilities opening?
I can speak to that. We had budgeted, as if you recall, in the spring when we revised the 2020 budget, we had to make an assumption about a point in time.
Yes.
And we were making the assumption of the midterm scenario. And we've done something similar here. At the time when we prepared the budget, rec facilities were not closed, nor was a closure on the horizon. So the budget that's before you made the assumption that there would be some reductions in revenue based on lower usage, but it did not include or assume that facilities would close. And we're continuing, I think we'll continue to see that type of uncertainty. And the plan we have, as much as we managed it in 2020, to come back to you once we understand the impacts of some of those things, and if required, make some adjustments.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this might be a question that you can't answer, which is totally cool because it's it's kind of a backwards way of thinking. I'm just curious, like we know that within our recreation department, we can lay off one position, but that position actually accounts for more revenue overall than, so do we have then what the position actually costs or costs that business center? Do we have at all something anecdotal in terms of like, well, for every $1 of layoff, it actually costs us another $1 in revenue or another $2 in revenue or something like that? Or is that not a really great way of looking at it?
We don't have that calculation down to that level.
Yeah, I just wondered if because you guys have been talking about this for months and months and months, and I just wondered if there was the happenstance, and I clearly understand this is happenstance, if that's ever been sort of thrown out there in your financial discussions. I think it would be an interesting way to sort of articulate the challenges we're facing in recreation to the public, and that's the reason why I'm asking.
We can certainly look at that. Again, when we brought forward the recommendation to use tax stabilization to help offset the lost revenue, that's exactly what we're getting at there. We are losing more revenue than we can save in expenses with facility closures or reductions.
The way it mostly has been about cost recovery, where in past we've had 70% cost recovery, and now we're looking at more like 30% cost recovery.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that on February 23rd when we bring the budget for approval. I'll work that in.
Perfect. Those were my only questions. Thank you so much.
Mayor Borman?
Thanks very much. Ms. Richardson, I just wanted to follow the thread that's connected to the most funding that went into the Tax Stabilization Reserve, the COVID-based funding. So last year we put $3.5 million.
The spreadsheet to show the numbers. Do you want?
Yeah, I'm looking at the spreadsheet.
Well, we haven't put it up on the screen.
Oh, right. Sorry, I should put it up on the overview.
I think that was our next thing.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay.
I'll pull it up and then we can speak to the numbers that you're referencing, just so everybody can follow along. It wasn't finished at the time we shared the package. So is everyone seeing this?
Yeah, if you could make it a little bit bigger.
We might lose some of the.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to scroll back. That's
yeah.
good. Can everybody see that? Okay.
I can make it bigger. It will just require more scrolling, so we can find where that right trade-off is for us.
I think this is fine.
And did you want to ask your question before I did the detailed walkthrough, Mayor Borelman?
No, why don't you go ahead and run us through this first?
Okay. So I know there's a lot of information here. I am going to try to go through this slowly in detail. I've built this the way it works in my brain. So if the way I'm explaining it doesn't make sense, please just stop me at any point. Generally, I try to make things a little easier to see at a glance, but this is quite a complex model, and we wanted to show the relationships between a number of different pieces, which means it kind of needs to be as large as it is. So really simply along the top here, we have the years. So I've included 2020 as that is where we've had a number of significant additions and draws this past year. So that's really what's taken us up to our proposed ending 2020 balance. Our financial statements aren't quite finished, but we're anticipating we'll end at 6.4 million. Then we have the 3 years that are included in the operating plan. So our 3 years, 2021, which we're seeking approval on, and then 2022 and 2023, which are the plan for adoption. That's why I've driven this line here. Everything before this point is something that the Finance Committee will have seen before. Anything outside this point is, again, just kind of this modeling we're doing for future purposes. Now, why we've chosen the timeframe we have is when we speak to the 6-year plan that we're looking at for the phase-in for fire, that would go 2021 through 2026. That's when those anticipated impacts would end. And so we've shown 2027 as well for when these anticipated increase from RCMP and fire would kind of phase out, and we would go back to potentially, again, it's a long way out, but a more standard year where we wouldn't expect these significant additional pressures. So that's kind of how we've chosen the years that we've modeled here. This top block is our tax stabilization reserve and the anticipated balances. So we have, as I spoke to, our 2020 anticipated closing balance. And so I have 3 different lines here for draws. So the first, the distinction I want to make here is this first row that I've highlighted is the draws that we've already included in the budget and the plan that we brought to Finance Committee. So these were planned. The 1.9 includes the first quarter's worth of COVID expenses that Council had approved, the $1 million related to recreation and their net loss, and then the $600,000 for our COVID contingency. We also had included planned draws in 2022 and 23 as well. So these are already in all the numbers that the Finance Committee has seen. And I've broken out here separately items that have arisen from the Finance Committee meetings up till this point. So included here is the 19,000 related to paid parking and the shortfall there. And then the 480,000 that was brought up at the meeting on Tuesday. So that is currently included in what we're looking at. But again, this is something we can look at on the fly, so we can take that out, put that back in. But just as a reminder, that's in there right now. These blue lines, again, or blue cells, I should say, are, again, illustrative draws for showing the smoothing. I'll come back to those. And then we also have the 44,000 transferred to Canmore Community Housing. It impacts our overall tax stabilization balance, but isn't a tax pressure. So that's why I've broken it out separately, as it doesn't impact our taxes. So the whole top block here is just showing our reserve balance and how that would draw down over time. This next block is the assumptions. So for our CMP, we would, as I spoke to in the assumptions, we're expecting to go to 90% in 2022. Their fiscal year is a little bit different than ours, so it impacts us in 2022 and 2023. And then we also have the additional positions as well. For fire rescue, we've put in amounts based on again, these numbers, sorry, I should have said this first. These are the changes year over year. This isn't the absolute value. This is the increase per year. So the delta, similar to some of the other tables we've been showing the Finance Committee. And then fire rescue, this would be the increase every year relating to the plan for the 6-year phase-in of peak staffing. Again, up to 2023, these numbers are in the operating plan that was in the detailed pages that we've provided. And then outside of that, it's just modeling at this point. So the combined impact of those two would be an additional $734,000 in 2022, $650,000 in 2023, and so on. So these draws we have planned related to these increases for 2022 and 2023. And then outside that, again, these are just illustrative and we can play with these numbers in a bit, but I'll finish going through the rest of this first. Sorry, my numbers are now too big to fit on the screen. Based on those, this would be our total planned municipal taxes for each of those years, which allows us to see the overall increase net of growth for each year. And then specifically, we can break down what the percentage increase is just related to RCMP and fire, which are the biggest anticipated pressures we're seeing, and then how that draw mitigates that impact. So I know that's a lot. That's
sorry, Ms. Richardson, can you go back
Yeah.
down to that bottom block? I just wanted to, and you'll probably get to this point, but with the possible direction of using the Tax Stabilization Reserve in 2021 to reduce the overall tax impact to 6.5, you can see how that kicks the can to 2022. So we had in the original model, and maybe that you can show that live, that increase was 5%, but by drawing down and reducing our total tax collected this year, it just bumps it to 2022, but it does help smooth it. Instead of an 8% peak and back down to 5, it's 6.5, 6.95. So that's the smoothing effect, but it just makes everything bigger, right? It doesn't bring it back down to the 5%.
Correct. So by adding permanent positions that add pressure going forward on our taxes indefinitely, the draw only helps in the year that it relates to. And then as soon as that draw is no longer in the budget, then that year we have the bump. So this is what this spreadsheet allows us to show. So right now, we have the draw of the 480,000, which brings our taxes down to 6.5. If I was to take that out, you can see that because of the additional positions we've added, we were at 8.4%, but we were only at 5% for the additional years. So then as soon as we add that draw back in, oh, did I put that? Sorry, I put that in the wrong row. That's my non-tax impact line 40. There we go. Then we drop down to 6.5, but now we see that, and sorry, because it's so big, it can't show the year and I can just squeeze it in. So for 2022, then we can see it goes to 6.9. Similarly, then, if we were to say, let's do another draw in 2022 to try to bring that back down to 5%, I already did some back of napkin math to figure out that that would be 512,000. We can see that year goes to 5, and then it kicks the next year up to 6.9. So when we talk about that kind of effect of kicking the can, this is what that means, is we have those ongoing permanent pressures, but because the base is changing every year, the draw only helps in the year that we're doing it, and eventually that change kind of comes home to roost. So this allows us to show that. So I'm just going to take out that 512, but you can see how it always bumps it ahead that 1 year.
Yeah, and I would just add that the smoothing is that instead of that really high peak of 8%, it just brings it down to the 6.5, 6.9, which helps to smooth it, but it makes it higher in the subsequent years.
Mm-hmm. So if I was just to take that draw out again, just because I know this is a lot of numbers, I find visuals helpful. So I've also prepared a little chart here. I'm hoping, since I'm sharing my whole Excel, it just flipped over here, but let me know if it didn't. But this shows the reserve balance. So along here, I've actually gone further back than we're showing in the model that shows how it's grown over time. But obviously we see the big uptick in 2020 when we've intentionally put that most funding in there, and then how we would draw it back over time. So in the plan as it currently stands, this blue line is the reserve balance. And then I've also put in our projected minimum and target balances per our reserve policy. So in a perfect world, we would want to stay between those bands. In the current, without the 480,000 draw, we're getting towards the minimum balance of the range. And then we can see how that would change over time if we put back in the 480,000. We drop a little bit below the minimum balance by 2026. But again, we don't have any planned draws or sorry, contributions, I should say, over this time frame. So this might be a bit conservative since we're not putting any more money in following the most money.
Okay, Councillor Mara, you had a question?
Actually, Ms. Richard just answered it when she said that includes that we haven't added any contributions to this formula.
Yeah, that was one of the assumptions, that is very conservative, but we never budget to add funds. So they're only coming from surpluses or other unintentional revenues that we receive.
Thank you.
We never plan for a surplus, we plan for a balanced budget. So this reflects the plan, but not necessarily what our experienced reality would really be. So this is the most conservative that this would probably represent.
Mayor Borman?
There we go. Yeah, thanks very much. So looking at the spreadsheet, I'm just thinking about the contributions and draws in 2020 and 2021 that are connected to the COVID and most funding. So the most funding grant has to be accounted for by the end of March this year, is that right?
That's the end of when the eligible expenses can occur.
Right. So in this spreadsheet, we're assuming that we will meet that qualification, and that I'm just wondering if there's any possibility that at the end of the day, we won't have been able to connect some of this funding out of the Tax Stabilization Reserve directly to the terms of the most grant, and then may have to repay the balance that hasn't been spent according to the rules. Is that at all possible?
I think the risk is low on that, but I won't say there's no risk. The province has changed rules as we've been going along. But when we presented our plan for the most funding in our recommendation to council in October, I think we were confident that we had actually already incurred the expenses that we needed to demonstrate in 2020. So that became less critical for us, this deadline of March 31st, because we'd already had enough losses of revenue and enough new expenses in 2020 itself to qualify for the most funding that we got.
So I'm reassured to know that it's very unlikely that there would be any additional draws from the Tax Stabilization Reserve associated to final accounting on the most grant funding.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good assumption, is it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. I just had a question with regards to your illustration. And I believe I know this to be true, but so in 2020, I note that in lines D6 or D25 to 27, that information isn't there in terms of what our taxes were and what our increase was, and that would have been a 0% increase, correct? Like net of everything, it was 0%?
Correct. Council made the decision to hold
Yeah.
taxes the same as 2019. And
So, yeah.
you have the balance here. It was 2,488,000. It's just white because it wasn't really relevant, but I do have it in here so that it calculates.
Actually, visually, I would say it is a bit relevant. It actually outlines what we've done already or the year that we completed. But I think from an illustration perspective, which is what this is all meant to be, it's sort of, I think what it's helped me realize is that, or I actually have realized this all along, but it is impressed upon me even more strongly that the large increase we're seeing this year is due to the fact that there was zero increase last year. And perhaps that increase or that lack of increase would have been best saved for this year. But we also knew at the time that there was a 50-50 chance that we were making the right decision or the wrong decision. We didn't know. So I think that that's what just it illustrates to me and anybody perhaps watching.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, is what this doesn't capture is the impacts of the decisions that were made in 2020 in response to COVID. Looking at this model for the purposes of budget preparation, I was really quite forward looking, modeling all the way out to 2027. But it really doesn't capture the significant impacts of the decisions that were made in 2020 and how that impacts where we are now.
Mayor Borman?
I think that's really an important part of the conversation that Councillor McCallum's raised. So is it reasonable to be thinking about this whole budget picture in the context of that 0% increase in 2020 and effectively acknowledge that we've spread the 2 years? If we spread the tax impact over 2 years, it's equivalent of about we'll call it 3 or 3.5% increase over 2 years, like 3.5% increase per year for 2 years.
I mean, in simple math, we had a 0% increase, and now with the draw of 480,000, we'd be looking at a 6.5%. So the average across the 2 years would be 3.25% each year if we averaged it out.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Average, that's what I was wondering. So, yeah, okay, thank you.
I would like to just add, because and just thinking about the conversation we had around the pea gravel and the rubber surface at the playground, and in what is administration's recommendation? Is this illustrative and just sharing information? We have had the discussion from administration around the purpose of the Tax Stabilization Reserve, which is clearly for a rainy day. And we have been building it intentionally, as council knows, for that rainy day we knew was coming in 2022, 23 and beyond with regards to the RCMP cost impacts, as well as moving to increase peak staffing phase in so that we can get to 4 full-time firefighters in the hall at any one time. And those are net new services. They're not typical annual increases. So we've been building this reserve intentionally for those purposes. And the pandemic is also a very much a rainy day issue. So from administration's perspective, we do believe that this is an appropriate use of the Tax Stabilization Reserve. The question is for council, is this, or for the Finance Committee, is this the right amount of phasing? Is this, Ms. Richardson was showing what some additional draws in 2022 might look like to push that wave or kick that tax increase further down the road. So you will be looking at the 2022 and 23 budgets as well from a plan perspective. So if you did want to provide direction for any future draws, that could be something the Finance Committee could look at. But from our perspective, this is why the Tax Stabilization Reserve is here. We would prefer this alternative over sending administration back to the budget to pull any other saving measures from that, because we would be looking at services then and service reductions. We have through 2020 done significant belt tightening measures, and many of those belt tightening measures have continued into 2021. There just really isn't much fluff. And if we look at the capital budget, where many councils have looked before to reduce draws to reserves, that would be something that the Finance Committee could look at as an alternative to this. However, as we did in 2020, when you reduced the budget, we would be asking you to remove capital projects. We can no longer consider doing all the capital we're doing without intentionally building those reserves. And I think we've had the presentation from our asset manager to really drive that point home, that we have a significant number of assets. We've been building assets in the last decade, and those need to be repaired and maintained. Just even, again, the playground example, a life cycle replacement of a playground surface is 10 years. Elevation place is coming up on 8 or 9 years old, right? So we're going to have a lot of components that are needing to start replace in many of our facilities that we still think of as being new. We need to build those asset reserves is basically what I'm saying. So, Councillor Hillstead?
Just out of curiosity, how much would need to be contributed to the tax stabilization reserve to get the tax stabilization chart to be back within the target in any of these upcoming years, since we're going with 0 contributions right now? Like, what would be the amount that would need to be added to just get it back to at least the target, just for food for thought?
That is a great number. I haven't actually done that math, and I'm not great at doing things on the fly, so I'm just going to try something, and we'll see. So if I put in, maybe let's pick 500. Nope, not that much. Like, it doesn't look like much in the chart, but the scale is always hard to tell. So yeah, even 500,000 would bring us back within that range. And again, this is really illustrative. I've made a lot of assumptions about how these balances would shift over time, because the minimum and target balances are based on percentages of overall expenditures. So I've assumed consistent growth over that time. And these will fluctuate with those pressures I put in as well. So this whole thing is scalable. But you can see, we're quite close to the minimum, but it wouldn't be a significant shortfall there, a contribution of even just 500,000. And again, at some point over that time frame would start to bring us back into that recommended range.
And historically, over the last couple of years, how much have we, other than last year where we did a bunch because of the most funding, but previous years from surpluses and stuff, how much have we added to the tax stabilization reserve?
So this might not be pretty, but I do have previous contributions here. Sorry, I wasn't planning on sharing this, so it's not really in a very readable format. Some of the recent years. So interest gets contributed every year. Those are pretty small amounts. The year-end surplus from 2012 that went in was 479,000. So getting pretty close to that 500,000 we'd be looking at. So it depends. For a lot of years, there weren't really significant contributions. You can see here, it's really just the interest we make on the balance. And then the most money was a significant contributor. So again, because they're kind of one-time sources, it's really hard to identify a consistent trend with that. But would it be safe to say that we would have some small surplus at some point in the next 7 years? I would say there's a reasonable chance of that. As much as we always plan a balanced budget, we usually err on the side of caution and would rather end up with a small surplus than a deficit. So again, depending on the decisions of future councils and how they choose to use money in the future, we could have contributions going forward.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion or debate on this? As Councillor McCallum's motion from last Tuesday, I guess it was, the 19th, was just to bring back an exploration of this. Should the Finance Committee wish to take this approach and have a draw, a $480,000 draw from the Tax Stabilization Reserve in 2021, we would need a final motion from the Finance Committee to do that. But we're happy to continue discussion and questions on this. But if Councillor McCallum or anyone else wishes to make a motion around this, you could do that, and then we could enter debate on that. Is there, okay, there's a couple of, Councillor Mara, you had your hand up.
I would be willing to move the motion
Okay,
if that's where we're at right now.
I believe so. I didn't see any other questions. Yes, so the motion would be to, that the Finance Committee approve a draw from the Tax Stabilization Reserve of $480,000 in 2021 to help smooth out the tax rate increase.
Yes,
Is that your motion?
that would be the motion. Yes, and the reason being is, as you spoke to earlier, this is our reason we put money in the tax stabilization fund for this kind of event. And I agree with smoothing, going down the road. Hopefully we can smooth in, and maybe we'll have a little bit of surplus to keep easing. But I think this is a tough time for everybody, and this is the right thing to do.
Mayor Borman?
I also will support the motion, and thank you for bringing that forward, Councillor Mara. Yeah, I support the idea of trying to smooth this, the impact that we're experiencing this year. And as has been noted, the whole point of the Tax Stabilization Reserve was, it was always meant for this kind of unimaginable year. So right now we're living what council for 10 or 15 years have been thinking about, and putting the funds aside for this purpose. We have some estimates of how things might roll out over the next several years. But the further out we go, the more assumptions there are. Other things could change, and the necessary or the projected impact in future tax years is well, less certain the further out you get. If council is going to continue to fund a tax stabilization reserve, which I would expect councils always will, then council has to be prepared to recognize when the need is there and draw down that reserve. So I think the need is here, and I'll support Councillor Mara's motion.
Is there Councillor Hillstead?
I'll also support the motion. I think it's, again, it's the right time. This is what the reserve is for a rainy day, and we've had a bit of that the last year and a bit. Again, because we did a 0% increase last year, it got us to this position of a much larger increase. So maybe we should have done a draw last year and kept it started smoothing it last year, but we decided to go 0%, and now we're trying to smooth it out from there. So I think it's the right time. And I think, yeah, it's just, we should do it. So.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum?
So I appreciate admin's synopsis on our reserve balances and continuing to contribute to our other like asset management and things like that. I really don't have any intention of robbing our future, which is basically what that's doing when we decide to underfund or not fund at all some of our other reserves. And I also really appreciate admin bringing this example forward to help understand what the future would look like with a drawdown like this. And what it looks like is a lot of years of tax increases over 5%. Which I don't think I really have an appetite for. I understand that this is a tough year. I understand that personally, as well as throughout our community. But I also don't think that I don't think I can support this. I feel like this is a cash call, basically, from the fact that we did not tax as planned last year. And we knew at that time when we, and I believe actually it was my suggestion to bring us to a 0% tax last year. So I will take full responsibility for that suggestion. I believe I was unanimously supported. So everybody drank my Kool-Aid. But I think that unfortunately, it actually spreads the pain out even more over time. I know that we have the opportunity when we set the tax rate to play a bit with that, to see how we can ease pressure. And I also know that we will be interested to see what happens with assessments moving forward in terms of whether our growth number is correct. But unfortunately, I think that this actually just makes it worse moving forward after 2022 than just having one bad year. So unfortunately, I know it was my suggestion, but I am going to be unable to support this. That, or I need more time to think about it. But right now I'm unable to support it. I'm sorry.
Mayor Borman?
Thanks for sharing your perspective, Councillor McCallum, which you know, a lot that you say resonates with me. I will note, though, that in future years, 2022 and on, future councils can always choose to draw down that reserve more and reduce the tax impact in that year. As has been noted, this is a very conservative estimate of the closing balance or closing balance going out over the years. And if we should see things turn around in our community and in society that and experience some of the surpluses that we've had in years past, once again, it wouldn't take too many good years like that to replenish the reserve balance up to what it was at the beginning of 2020. So I guess all I'm saying is the further out into the future we gaze, the less certain we are. We're certain about the impact this year. And again, I think that's the purpose of the reserve, is to smooth out the balance year by year. So I'll continue to support the motion.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. I too will support the amendment. It's interesting to hear the different perspectives on the use of the Tax Stabilization Reserve. And I know that we have used it in the past for smoothing tax increases. I also think that because we're still experiencing COVID impacts, some people's ability to pay, even in this year, is going to be impacted because there was a shortfall in revenue in some of our commercial sectors in 2020. And I think people are still experiencing that with lockdowns at the moment. And we don't know when the financial situation is going to change for everyone. So in terms of smoothing a tax increase, I think this is a good time to do it. And as Mayor Borman suggested in the past, even though we don't fund this reserve in an intentional way, surpluses that do accrue from a budget year have been put into this tax stabilization reserve and used on a go-forward basis. So I think the mechanism that we're using to fund the tax stabilization reserve is sound. And when we get back to a reasonable financial and investment situation in our community, when we start to see a more normal economic environment, I think the way that we've been funding this tax stabilization reserve, the potential is there to do it again. So I think at this point in time, we need that smoothing option.
Councillor Steele?
I'll support this motion for many of the reasons that have come forward already, but 0% last year, we knew that things would get tricky this year and future years.
Well, you're kind of breaking up there, Counselor.
Is a good way to do it, and the most funding, and we can make adjustments, and I'm confident we can.
Thank you, Councillor Seeley. I'll just let you know that you did break up there for a bit of your time. So I'm not sure if you wanted to speak again, but you're supporting the motion?
I said? No? Okay. Just that I agree with the tax stabilization, and there's going to be adjustments that we can make in future years to bring that percentage down. And it's also important to continue to support this tax stabilization at some point. And I'm confident that we can do that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Seeley. Councillor McCallum?
I appreciate everyone's perspectives, and I thank you for what you've provided. I just want to correct a few misconceptions. We haven't been contributing to the tax stabilization fund on an annual basis with our surpluses. We've actually been contributing to asset management replacement, boosting our capital reserves and boosting our PAH reserves. That's actually where we've been putting the majority of our money when we have been receiving surpluses, not in the tax stabilization. So the contribution to tax stabilization isn't something that I would describe as sound. I would describe it as a one-off whenever it comes available. I would also point out that many of the increases that we see in future years are certain. Those are certain increases. We know what much fire is going to cost us. We know what our CMP is going to cost us. Those are certain increases and not necessarily things that we can play with. So most of our increases in the future years are going to be contained within cost of living and those two line items, budget line items, both fire and our CMP. And so those are going to be very tricky numbers to get down because they are outlined in contract. I just wanted to point that out to everybody.
Is there any other discussion or debate on this item? Okay, seeing none, I will move Councillor Mara's motion to draw down the tax stabilization reserve in 2021. Those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried with Councillor McCallum opposed. Okay, so that, yeah, Ms. Rogers, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that does conclude the discussion we had planned for today. And the remaining item that we had would be the 4 motions that we require the Finance Committee to approve, which would be to recommend bringing both the operating and capital budgets and plans forward to Council. So just wanted to pause there to check in once more if there are any other questions or discussion items you wish to have before we get to that final agenda piece.
Any other issues in the budget, both operating and capital, that anyone wants to raise? Mayor Borman?
Just, no, I'm quite prepared to go ahead and vote on these motions. I just sort of a heads up that I'm still mulling over the discussion we had last Finance Committee meeting led by Councillor Comfort regarding the value of the satisfaction survey, and I may well bring that back for another discussion once the budget comes to Council. Just an FYI.
Okay, do you have a slide with those motions?
I do, yep. I'll just share my screen again. All right. Give me 1 sec. Okay, can you see that all right?
You'll have to switch screens again. That's your other view.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the way we've worded the motions is that the Finance Committee recommend that Council approve, because I think in your package it might have you said the word direct, but the Finance Committee can't direct Council. So this is a bit of modified wording from your package. But the intent is that you've had most of the debate and discussion you want to have on the budget as a finance committee, and you're now looking to council to approve what you've concluded as the best budgets to put forward. So I'm happy to make each of these motions unless someone from the finance committee wants to. Mayor Borman?
I was just thinking about that, and for the reception in the community, it might be better for these motions to be put forward by myself or another member of council.
Sure.
Even though it's always been clear that as a part of the, as a member of the finance committee and generally chairing the committee meetings, you have and can put motions forward. I'm just thinking for now, we can move forward more from the council level.
Did you want to make this first motion?
I will. I'll move that the finance committee recommend that council approve the 2021 operating budget and business plan as amended. And I'll speak in support of the motion. I needn't review all of the hours of discussion and the reports that have been prepared and the reports that have been reanalyzed and the responses from administration to multitude of council or committee questions for some time now. We've really done what we've been paid or being paid to do, what the community has us sitting for, and this is one of the most difficult parts of every year's business for a council is approving a budget. While I'm not at all thrilled by the my anticipation of some of the feedback we'll get in the public, I really believe that this is a very supportable budget for this year, and I will support it.
Anybody else willing or wanting to speak to that first motion? Councillor McCallum?
So thank you. And I would agree with many of the things that Mayor Barrowman has outlined. I do believe that many components in this budget are absolutely defensible. It's a trimmed budget. It was a difficult budget. We've spent many hours, many hours on our own, never mind admin hours, trying to put this budget together. However, that the last amendment just really made me realize how much I can't actually support the implementation of the budget as a finance committee member. I have heard over the last 10 years us being advised many times when things like this, we've been told, this is a difficult budget. This is a difficult budget. This is the difficult budget. This is the one. And we've been advised over all those years to not kick the can down the road. And yet here we are kicking the can once again down the road. And I don't think I can support that anymore. So as a finance committee member, I will not be able to support item 1 of our approvals today.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Is there any other discussion or debate? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mr. Soto. I know that we've examined just about every concept in this budget to a very deep level, and it's a very difficult one to remove things from. So I know that there are things that we have to do and there are infrastructure things that have to go forward. But I think what we've done is examine every piece of detail here, and it is a defensible budget in the sense that a lot of these go forward things are on the horizon and have to be done, but they also have to be done with a backdrop of incredible uncertainty and some fiscal pain for a lot of people in this community right now. So I think we have to move forward with recognizing, yes, there are things on the horizon that we know are coming down, but we also have to deal with what is happening right now. And I know that the last 2 years we've had to, in 2020 and in 2021, we've had to make some unexpected adjustments. And I think the adjustments that we have made are reasonable, and I think I will support it based on that.
Yes, Mayor Borman?
Just in spirit of debate to Councillor McCallum, I appreciate that you, in the way you spoke, you haven't closed the door to yet supporting a similar motion at council level. But I would note, in regards to the idea of having to bite the bullet one day, 1 year, whatever, if we're going to have to ask taxpayers to bite the bullet and accept a really significant tax increase, more than what this budget would result in if approved as presented, this is the wrong year. This is the worst year council could pick to ask taxpayers to bite the bullet, because as we know, so many taxpayers this isn't a very good year financially for them, and particularly our commercial taxpayers. If we're going to, as you suggest, kick a can down the road, I think it might be preferable to kick it down to a year in which business is resumed and people are working and everybody's whole again from a income perspective. So just wanted to share that thought with you.
Okay, is there any other discussion, debate on the first motion? Seeing none, I will move Mayor Borman's motion then. Those in favor? Those opposed? That motion is carried with Councillor McCallum opposed. Is there anyone wishing to move motion number 2?
I will do that. I'll move the Finance Committee recommend that council approve the 2022 to 2023 operating plan summary for planning purposes as amended. And again, speak in support of this motion. I'm not going to repeat the words that I just spoke at the last motion, but it's the same. What's informing my support for this motion is the same as the last. We've done a lot of work, and I'm very confident that the budget and the operating plan summary, everything that was before the committee today for recommending to council has been well considered. So happy to support this motion.
Any other discussion, debate? Seeing none, we'll move the motion that Mayor Borman put on the floor. Those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried with Councillor McCallum opposed as well.
I'll then move that the Finance Committee recommend that council approve the 2021 capital plan as amended. And I'll speak in support of this motion for the same reasons I've spoken to with the earlier motions.
Councillor Comfort?
Yes, I will also support this motion. I'm particularly proud of the initiatives going forward with sustainability, and I think that will serve the community interest well and the desires of the community. So I look forward to seeing those implemented.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum?
I'll be happy to support the capital plan. I believe it's well thought out. It is quite lean in response to the year that we're looking at, and takes into account the balances of our reserves to fund many of these projects. So that and the capital, the summary for the 5-year outlook, I'll be happy to support both of them when the second comes forward as well.
Thank you. Any other discussion, debate? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question on that motion. Those in favor? Opposed? That one's carried unanimously.
And then I will move the Finance Committee recommend that council approve the 2021 to 2025 capital planning summary for planning purposes as amended. And I'll speak in support of this motion and reference the previous comments I've made in support of the other motions.
Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, I will call the question on Mayor Borrellman's motion then, the last one today. Those in favor? And opposed, and that is carried unanimously.
So this is
that,
coming back to council on the 23rd, I believe.
that is correct, yes.
Right.
And
So
we will have Staff Sergeant Singleton speak to council at the February 2nd meeting.
okay, that's great. Just before you adjourn the meeting, or the meeting's adjourned, there's a lot of work yet to do, but I do want to take a moment to thank administration for the amount of work that they've put into bringing forward such a complicated and difficult budget in a complicated and difficult year. Certainly, and we can speak to this as well at council, but the strong confidence that I have in our town administration and in the finance department and throughout the departments is one reason that I'm comfortable when we get to these decision points. Certainly there's debate and there's modifications that are proposed. That's the process. But overriding all of that, council needs to have confidence in our administrative team to be able to move forward on these difficult issues. So my thanks to you, Ms. DeSoto, and all of your team. And
Yeah, and thank you. Well, I'll accept that thanks. It certainly, as you've mentioned, does not belong to me, and more so than any other year with the guidance of a GM of Corporate Services and Therese Rogers and Ms. Richardson and Mr. Irwin and the finance team. They have done a tremendous job. So specifically like to thank that team most importantly, and really it is a team effort to the managers, supervisors, and all of our divisions as well, and GMs there. So thank you on behalf of all of them. And I guess with that, we will adjourn. I'll move that the Finance Committee be adjourned. Those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you.